out there, and welcome back to the GamecockScoop.com podcast, the official podcast of GamecockScoop.com on Rivals. I'm Caleb, joined by Alan. Make sure you subscribe wherever you're listening. It's at Rivals Gamecock for all social media. And yeah, we're on Spotify and Podbean and your podcast app and all the things. So subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts, and you'll see us every single week. So, sorry, we're starting with baseball, and I can't even really figure out how I would like to to start that. I think I'll start it like this. We kind of talked all season about how it felt like they were like hanging by a thread, but they always kept finding a way to win that one game that they needed to when their back was against a wall to kind of keep things afloat. And to me, it felt like this last weekend against Georgia, where of course they got swept, really outplayed across the board. Although we can talk about game 3 because that one felt like a particularly tough gut punch. But we get swept by Georgia, and to me, it feels like maybe the rug pull finally came. You finally got fully exposed, finally fell flat in the wrong moment. And the margins, as we talked about all season, were super thin. And now you need a miracle, right? You're going to have to go on the road to Tennessee and win 2 of 3 to stay in the hosting conversation, I think, unless you go and like win the tournament in Hoover or whatever. But that would be a miracle too, right? So either way, you're going to need.
I think it still qualifies.
Either way, you're going to need something drastic to happen. First time you've been swept at home since 2019 against Vanderbilt. And really, what were the vibes like this weekend? Because this is a program and a fan base that cares very much about baseball. And at least the way it bled through on the screen, I don't know. It didn't seem like there was a whole lot of passion. Granted, there wasn't a whole lot of positive things to be rooting for either, but
I think I don't even. Again, I'm almost kind of like you. I don't even know where to start with this. I think you probably start at the end, like you said, and the details almost don't matter for these games. But we can get into game 3 a little bit, like you said. You lose, you get blown out. Well, you get down really big Thursday. You kind of sort of make it interesting late, but you lose 14-10. But you were down 10-3 in the 4th inning, I think it was. Friday, same deal. You're down 10-1 in the 5th. You lose 11-5. Saturday, you start Garrett Gainey, which you haven't done all year, just trying to make something stick. And he actually pitches pretty well, 5 2/3, 3 runs allowed. One of them was off an error that wasn't his fault.
Pretty much the only pitcher all weekend, I would say, that actually shut Georgia down at times.
Yeah, and you've got a lead in the 7th inning. Georgia ties it. You take the lead back in the bottom of the 7th. You're up 6-4 going to the 8th. And then the wheels fall off. You give up 10 runs in the last 2 innings between SQ, Becker, McCreary. Oh my God, I can't even think who pitched after McCreary. Polk, I think. It almost doesn't even matter. You give up 10 runs in the 2 innings. You lose 14-6. Defense was hideous. Couple errors in there. Pitching, I think that kind of goes without saying. You get swept at home. It's just, I started to look around kind of about 8th, 9th inning. People are leaving. The place is dead. It's quiet. It's just, there's different conversations we've had about, okay, South Carolina baseball and what can it really be? You're probably never going to win back-to-back national titles again, and it's a different era. But like, I just kept thinking it should never, ever look like that. It should never, ever in a big home series be empty before the game's over. No energy, almost no hope. Like, it just felt like there was no hope left in there. Not just for those games, which were clearly out of reach, but almost for the year. I kind of wrote it in the weekend wrap. It's just kind of like, I don't know how you look at this at this point. Again, there's 3 regular season games to go. There's an SEC tournament. There's a regional. If this trends the way it's trending, I don't really know how you can justify running it back.
Yeah, and back to that game 3, that was an important game. Like we've seen throughout the season, really, um, them finding a way to win that game three. It's happened 3 or 4 times at this point. And then you at least have like a little bit of positive momentum heading out of the weekend. You still kind of keep that NCC record around 500. You know, like they've done it all year, and then they did kind of string together a couple wins leading up to this series that you know, made it seem like it was possible to be hosting again. So to get swept at home in this spot, yeah, it feels bad. um, and then the larger conversation, which I'm sure we'll get more into, that you kind of noted there. Yeah, I think it would be it's tough, right? Because this isn't like a full mush champing of this program. It,
Sure.
right? It doesn't feel like you're Missouri, for example, or whatever, where um, there's not anything positive that's come out of the season, but you're mediocre. And to me, almost a decade of mediocrity. Really, it's over a decade of mediocrity. But I'm just talking about the King scenario in particular. Um, I don't know. You feel like you're like wandering in the wilderness, like Don Shula era Alabama or something. And I do think that that's an appropriate
Yeah.
metaphor. I think South Carolina baseball should be, or at least, and a lot of the fan base believes should be, and I don't think incorrectly so. That level in the SEC baseball pecking order, even though, yes, you're right, the SEC has gotten better. Maybe you don't win back to back national championships ever again, whatever. Um, you were supposed to get better with it, right? You had the head start.
Yeah. That's probably a good way to put it. You had the head start. And really, you talk about that pecking order. Like, I think kind of what struck me and kind of what I've been thinking about a lot this week is okay, you're going to Tennessee this weekend. You're going to Knoxville. That's a great baseball team. They're number one in the country. They've won 8 series and like they might win the national title. That's all that given. I'm not taking anything from Tennessee. You're going into a series, just blanket statement this, regardless of opponent or stadium or whatever. You're going into a series and nobody realistically thinks you can win it. That's like, forget about anything else. Forget about whatever this team is, whatever that team is. Just the idea of South Carolina baseball going into a series late in the year with stakes that nobody realistically thinks they have a puncher's chance in. Does that not kind of say the whole thing right there?
No, right. Like even in the past, because yes, Tennessee's very good. They are number one right now. Is that right?
Yep, they're number one.
Yeah. So number one team in the country. So and this late in the season, obviously, well earned and deserved. But that isn't. Yeah, your program should never be to a point. I think where like this should be the big series to end the season to see who's going to be a national seed or not or
Yeah.
whatever. Instead, it's like, oh, what like what percent chance would you give them of winning 2 of 3 this weekend? Like it's got to
Under
be
10 for
under 10.
sure. I mean,
Yeah,
Tennessee hasn't lost a home series all year. I mean, they've only lost one series period. Like I said, it was on the road. Um, I don't even know how you'd piece it together. Like we can talk about that for a second too. Like they put a weekend rotation, and if you're listening and not watching the YouTube video, I just use air quotes because they said Ty Good's going to start tomorrow. Okay, no starter for Friday, no starter for Saturday. I don't even think they know where to go on the mound right now, where you can get outs, and it's kind of the 81 outs thing, right? I was talking about this with someone yesterday. You need 81 outs in an SEC series. You got 3 games. You can move Garrett Gainey to start from the bullpen, and that's fine. But you're just moving his outs. Like someone else still has to pitch later in the game. And if you don't have the dudes, you don't have the dudes. And I'm not really sure how you would piece together winning 2 games this weekend.
yeah. You just create a different problem if you have
Yeah.
Gainey start, which I think you probably should start him.
I think you
So
have
you
to
at least,
after how
yeah,
he pitched last
exactly.
weekend.
But yeah, it's kind of been really disappointing because the pitching seemed like the strong suit through the first half of the season or so. And then the bats finally sort of came alive and the pitching fell off. It just doesn't. It's been a weird season. You just haven't been able to get all the cylinders firing at the same time, with the exception of maybe the sweep against Vanderbilt, and then
Yeah.
more recently, I guess that series against Kentucky was some of the best baseball you've played this year. So I don't know. Can you rally it together and give Tennessee their first home series loss of the season and their first SEC series loss since
It was week one. They lost
yeah,
two out of three to
say
Alabama the
their
first weekend of the conference play.
yeah
They've won every series since.
yeah literally their first series. So um not to mention just the like emotional aspect too, because we talked about it. I believe Kingston himself used the term gut punch.
Yeah.
Um, that's a really tough thing to rally back from, and you got to come back on a Thursday again.
Yep.
So another short. I mean, I guess the series ended on Saturday, so not really a short week, but feels like a short week.
Yeah, and I feel like all we do on here is we pick apart Mark Kingston quotes and figure out what it means for the psychoanalysis of this baseball program. But he had another one. I guess it would have been Tuesday was his pre-Tennessee press conference. Today's Wednesday when we're recording this. So yesterday, that I thought I don't have the quote in front of me, but he basically said, someone asked him about, what's left for this year and what are you still looking for, and he said, this is not a conference you go to if you want to have an undefeated record. Okay, true. No one's going 30-0 in SEC play.
Sure.
This is not a conference you look for if you want someone to dominate. Well, someone wins the league every year. And he basically pulled the Mississippi State and Ole Miss, didn't have great regular seasons. They got hot and won national titles recently. That's true. Ole Miss, I guess 2 years ago now, was like the last team in the tournament and they won the national title. That's fine, but is that the goal here? Is the goal here to sneak into tournament as a 3 seed in the regional and get hot for a month?
I mean,
And can you count on that? Can you snap your fingers and play your best baseball in June because you say you're going to?
At this point, I feel like he better hope, because I think that's his last shot, really, at this point. I guess I kind of wanted to bring that up for a second too. This is Mark Kingston. This is what he does. Like, this is not out of the ordinary. Even before he came to South Carolina, at Illinois State, he had a career 629 winning percentage. At South Florida, he had a career 561 winning percentage. He actually had a losing record in conference at South Florida. And now so far here, he's got a 586 winning percentage and 470 in conference. And if you're looking at just this year, that's right in line, 647. Yeah. So a little higher on the overall season, but 481 winning percentage in conference. You're at 13 and 14 in conference. I think it is what it is at this point, and I think there's enough evidence at this point to say it is what it is. And sure, that means you'll probably, like I said, you are not going to mush champ. You're not going to fully fall off, I think, if you give him another year. But are the standards higher than we're going to finish as the last SEC team or two to get into the tournament, and then hopefully something happens?
That's kind of the way it's kind of made it sound. And I realize at this point, that's, like you said, that's kind of all that's left. You're not going to host, barring a miracle. You're definitely not getting a national seed. You're not winning the SEC. I don't think you can even finish higher than like 6th in the SEC mathematically. So you are right in the middle of the pack. I think you're 7th right now going into this last series. I think that's, at this point, you're going to be in a regional. I mean, barring something really stupid, 13 SEC wins and a top 20 RPI should be enough to bank that. You're going to be going to someone else's ballpark. And we talked about trying to piece together 2 wins this weekend, right? Like, granted, you're not playing Tennessee 3 days in a row in a regional. Like, you're going to be playing different teams, and probably none of them are going to be quite as good as number 1 team in the country. But you got to win 3 games in a weekend to win a regional. Like, is anybody feeling that this team can piece together 3 in a weekend?
I mean, the crazy thing is, if they ended up going to a non-SEC host, I mean, it depends, right? Obviously,
they have to for the regional,
right?
You can only be a super for an SEC.
I could see them winning as a 2 seed. It's not crazy. I mean, they've done fine out of conference for the most part throughout the year. it obviously depends on where they go, but yeah, the SEC is a stacked conference. I'm not trying to say that it's not. There's a reason that what 8, 9, 10 SEC
Yeah.
schools will be in the tournament. Um, I just don't know if it's enough. Yeah, it'll be interesting. It'll be really interesting.
And
That I
that's the
mean,
other conversation. Yeah, go ahead.
no, I just obviously there's a lot of work to be done to even get to that point. But if you somehow make it to a super, then I think that this discussion gets really difficult.
Yeah.
Um, but I wouldn't put the odds very high on that right now. And if you don't make it to a super, to me, again, this isn't my job necessarily to say whether someone should be done or not. To me, it feels done at that point.
I'm inclined to agree with you just because of what that would mean, what that would look like, especially because, and this is another point someone brought up to me the other day, but you lost 7 of your last 9 SEC games last year, kind of limped into hosting with that hot start. Right now, you've lost, let's say you get swept this weekend. Let's say the number 1 team in the country does what they've done to everyone else. That's 8 out of 9, or 7 out of 8, excuse me. 7 out of 8 to end the year. Even if you win one this weekend, that's losing 6 out of 8 SEC to end the year. So that's 2 years in a row you've basically fallen off a cliff in May. You salvaged it in a regional last year. Even if you did again, I almost like there's enough of a pattern here that late in the season you're not playing your best baseball. That I would wonder if it's just time to move
Where
on there. But
you don't even have the injury excuse this year either.
that's
So
also a good point. Last year, you lost 2 weekend starters, you lost 2 of your starting infielders, you were banged up. You actually were, like no pun intended, limping into the postseason, and then you kind of got healthy at the right time. But that's true. You've almost remarkably, other than Eddie Copper, who was starting midweeks for you the first half of the year and got hurt, you've pretty much had every pitcher healthy all year, which just doesn't happen in college baseball, and you still haven't really been able to do anything with it.
do you think this roster could have done any differently with different coaching, I guess? Like, were there decisions made throughout the season you think lost some games?
Yeah, I do. I mean, I'm not going to pinpoint stuff that
No, it
happened in
doesn't
like
have to be
March or
specific ones.
like,
I mean, an overarching one is I think probably waited a little too long to make the lineup changes that you
yeah.
made. Um, Probably should have won some of those earlier season matchups if you aren't so stubborn. And I get it. I mean, like, you gave up a little bit of something defensively, but look at the team you just played. That was a terrible defensive team, and they just
5 errors in the Saturday game Georgia had.
yeah, and they just blew the doors off of you because it
Yep.
doesn't matter if you have a lineup that can hit against all these great pitchers in this league. So
Yeah. That, and
yeah,
I think you probably waited a little bit too long to get Ty Good more innings on weekends. He's
end
really
game,
been
yeah.
your most consistent SEC pitcher, and he wasn't really throwing that much on weekends early in the year. Um, I think there's that. You waited a while to get Austin Brenling in there. It was like mid-April, and he's hit pretty well. There's some overarching stuff for sure. And I don't know if it's an approach thing. I don't know if it's a game management thing, if it's a mentality thing, but I don't think any of us looked at this roster in February and said 13 and 14 in the SEC. I didn't.
I think the other thing that isn't doing Kingston any favors right now, and he even mentioned it in the press conference, Georgia has a first-year head coach that turned over that roster in the transfer
That is a
portal
very good point. Yep.
and made it work immediately. The team in the upstate
Second year coach.
has a second-year coach that very quickly has turned things around, and they're probably going to end up as a national seed or right around there. Yeah, I mean, when you're sandwiched by that and you've seen immediate results, more or less, and you've given someone 8 years and have maybe one season that you feel pretty good about last year of those 8 years, then that's a tough comparison point.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up because, like you said, he did mention that Saturday post game. He's just said it was, he gave a lot of credit to how fast Georgia's turned it around in 1 year. Well, it's not comfortable to say, but Georgia fired a coach after last year. They were a bad team. They didn't even make it to a regional last year. It had been a while. It had gotten stale there. They made a change. And it's not all coaching. They've got probably the number one overall pick in the MLB draft year coming up in their lineup, and that helps. But still, like, it's not nothing. They've patched it together with a pitching staff that's not great but serviceable. The lineups, you saw what the lineup did this weekend. And here we are. Georgia might get a national seed. Clemson's probably going to get one too. And at a certain point, you just kind of wonder. I guess maybe this is where you leave it. Like, if Georgia can do this, if Kentucky can be getting a national seed, and they got to a super last year too. Tennessee was nowhere near South Carolina 3 years ago. Look where that program is now. If those programs can do it, there's no reason South Carolina can't.
I do, and I also do think there's something to be said that the transfer portal has changed dramatically since Kingston arrived to now. So should a change be made, it wouldn't surprise me if, just like all the other sports, that's something that you're looking for in your candidate is someone that's shown a little bit of a ability to make that happen. Granted, I don't think that Kingston's done terrible in the portal or anything. Brought in some pretty important contributors and stuff, but
yep.
I do think that's going to be a factor, and he had to learn on the job in that respect, at least I think so. We'll see.
Yeah,
hey, maybe we come back next week after they sweep Tennessee.
Did we write the obituary a little bit too soon?
I mean, it's hard to say, right? With this team, it's been very up and down. We have, I don't know if I ever unburied them after the Clemson series at the beginning of the year.
That's true. I've been a little bit more even keeled than you. And I guess maybe it ended up being you're right. We'll see how these last three games go, whatever happens after that. But
well, it's not. I don't take any pleasure in being right, because
no, I know, but
I think we both talked about this, right? Like, even when they were winning games or squeaking by one game out of a series to stay alive, it always felt like your eyes were lying to you, or your eyes were telling you something differently than the record was. Mm-hmm. And it felt like that kind of culminated this weekend, and it wouldn't surprise me if it culminates again this coming weekend, to really put an exclamation point on, or whatever the opposite negative of an exclamation point is on the season.
It just feels this is going to end very unceremoniously. You're going to go to a regional. It will not be at Founders Park. You probably won't go 0-2 there. You'll play the 4 seed at some point, maybe get a win. You'll be on that last day of the regional, either in like the 1-1 game or as like the team with one loss in the final. You probably won't win it, and that'll just be that. That's about where the water finds its level there, right? Like, I don't think it's going to I don't think you'd get swept out of a regional, but I also have a really hard time seeing you win one.
I think that's the most likely scenario, but we would have to see where they end up. I do think, the majority of the top teams in the country are in the SEC, which is not a crazy thing to say. So if they go to a regional as a 2 seed or a 3 seed even, although that's a longer shot, and get the right draw, I think they could piece it together, but I wouldn't put money on it.
Yeah, I wouldn't either, and I definitely would not put money on them winning a series in Knoxville this weekend, which means you're finishing under 500 in the SEC for the second time in 3 years. You're going to Hoover is probably like the 8 or the 9 seed at that point, and you're definitely not hosting.
Yep, that about sums it up. But again, it's not over. We're not burying them yet.
There's baseball to be played this weekend. Come read the website.
There is. So we'll have live coverage of all 3 games this weekend. And then, maybe they make a run in Hoover. The thing is, they could still end up hosting it. It just is the longest of long shots at this point. So trying to speak to reality and not dream world.
There's no reason to be positive after last weekend. Like, you got swept and you gave up 39 runs in 3 games. We're all realists. We have eyes. We watched it.
Yeah, and just go back to those last. I mean, you're 6 outs away from at least salvaging a win, and then it just totally
Yep.
blows up in your face. So let's talk a little bit of football. So we're, I don't know the exact count, but something like 12 weeks away from August.
I can get you a
Somewhere in
day
that
number.
range, at
Hang on.
least.
Keep talking. Go ahead. I can get you a number of
Yeah.
days till the first game.
So there's about 12 football games. So we're going to start breaking down the schedule week by week. We're going to, if it's an SEC team, we'll just do one per week. If it's a non-con, we might do a non-con and an SEC team, which is what we're going to do this week. We'll probably finish a couple weeks before the season, but by that point, SEC media days will have happened, and we'll have more real things to talk about.
You're 108 days from the first game, and let's see, I can do math. Like 78 days away from camp opening. So
There we go. Yeah. So I don't know. That's 10 points. That's 11 weeks. There we go.
yeah,
Perfect.
basically 11 weeks till camp. Yeah.
So let's start. Well, we got a little bit of news today about the Kentucky game.
The
It's going to be,
smallest crumb of football news
yeah,
today.
yeah, that's going to be at 3:30 on
On
ABC.
ABC, not
Yeah.
CBS anymore for the big SEC game every week. 3:30 on ABC, which is going to be weird and take some getting used to, and probably going to have a new theme song.
So that was my question. That is like the SEC game of the week.
I'm pretty sure it's the only SEC game week 2.
Well,
Everyone else is either still doing non-con or playing cupcakes, or I know that's the first SEC game of the season for anybody, South Carolina at Kentucky. So yeah, that is the by default game of the week 2.
yeah, and honestly, I think should be a fun one, which we'll talk about here in just a second. Obviously, the week before that, you have a home game against Old Dominion. We don't have a time for that one yet, right?
Correct. The ESPN put out a release yesterday saying that all the time for weeks 1 through 3 were coming May 30th, and they went back on that and put one of them out today, which is not May 30th. So I don't know. They do it when they do it, and we'll know when the games are eventually.
Yeah, I guess they were just trying to get a little bit of SEC hype now that they have the 3:30 game. Okay, so Old Dominion, we don't know the time yet. If I was guessing, and South Carolina has any say in it, because it'll probably
Night
be
game.
on SEC Network Plus or ESPN Plus or whatever. It'll probably be a night game, but
You put a
who
noon
knows?
game in Columbia in August against Old Dominion. That's how you end up not selling out your opener.
Yeah, exactly. So we'll see how that goes. As far as just previewing Old Dominion real quick, I don't have a ton. Weirdly, I haven't fully scouted all of Old Dominion's roster, but I can tell you a little bit about last year. So last year they went 6-7. They did go to a bowl game, which they lost to Western Kentucky. They went to the Bahamas Bowl, which, hey, that's kind of a nice consolation for winning 6 games. Go to the Bahamas. They beat Georgia State, who South Carolina obviously was familiar with last season, 25-24 in the final game of the season. So that was pretty crazy. See, they beat Georgia Southern. They beat App State. They're kind of up and down. Virginia Tech beat them. Coastal Carolina beat them. Liberty beat them. So pretty much anytime they ran into upper level
It's a
competition, they didn't fare
middle
so
of the
well.
pack
But
Sun Belt program right now.
totally. So very similar, I think, talent wise to the Georgia State team you opened with last year.
2 years ago now, right?
Oh, you're right. Wow.
Time marches on.
It does. 2 years ago. When I'm looking at their transfer portal activity from this past offseason, probably going to look at a transfer quarterback. Emmett Moorhead came from Boston College. I don't know who else is currently on the roster, so we'll have to see on that. A couple more D1 transfers. They had a wide receiver, Deontay Vines from Iowa, a cornerback from Arizona, Charles Yates, a running back from Rutgers, Aaron Young, a running back from Virginia Tech, Bryce Duke. So probably one of those two guys will make an impact there. And then a offensive lineman from Illinois, Zach Barlev. Um, just some random names to kind of think of that might be a little bit different and might make an immediate impact. Kind of going down from a Power Five level to them. Um, that's really all I know about Old Dominion. Do you know anything about Old Dominion?
I know they played a lot of close games last year. 11 out of the 13 were decided by one score. Obviously, they didn't win all of those, but they were pretty much in every game. And like I said, it's a pretty typical middle of the pack Sun Belt team. 3-9 the year before last, but then the year before that, 6-6 again, then lost a bowl game. So I think that's Ricky Rane is the coach there, the old Penn State coordinator. So is I certainly would expect South Carolina to have more than enough in the tank to win this game. I don't know. You want to set a line right now for week one? South Carolina by 17, 20 in Vegas, somewhere in there.
Yeah, I would say probably at least 3 scores. But the question I have for you is, what score has you excited coming out of week one against Old Dominion?
Anything that involves Lenore Sellers in the offense, moving the ball up and down the field several times, like stringing together a full game. Because Loris hasn't even done that yet. He's just played in kind of mop up. He hasn't had to play a 60-minute football game in college. So even against Old Dominion, and just anything that, hey, you scored points in all 4 quarters, you had touchdown drives in both halves, you just things like that where you kind of see a full game progression and ultimately, yeah, probably score in the 30s and win by 20 something.
Yeah, I was thinking something like 31-10. You're feeling pretty good. Because I think also we've talked about this a little bit and we'll talk about it a lot more heading into the offseason. I I think you agree with me on this, but this is definitely my take. I think this is the best defense that Shane Beamer has had since he's been here. So I think I also want to see a fairly dominant performance against a inferior opponent. Um, if they score 10 or 14 or whatever, I want that to be late. Game should feel in hand by early third quarter, in my opinion, to be excited. Now, obviously, a win is a win is a win, and it's opening game, and at least you get this warm up game compared to last year where you had to immediately
Sure.
open against North Carolina. So, I mean, I don't think it's you don't get a preseason in college football, right? And this is kind of like a preseason game, and like a preseason game, it's hard to fully tell, right? Like there's like that cliche of you get so much better between week one and week two. So I'm not freaking out pretty much no matter what happens as long as you win. But if I'm going to start to overreact in the positive, I think 31-10 with some of those things that you mentioned and a defensive performance like I mentioned gets the hype train rolling.
Yep. And then I agree with that. I agree with you on the defense. Then you roll that hype train up to Lexington, Kentucky for what is honestly, in my opinion, the most important game on your schedule. I think there's such a difference between 2-0 and 1-1. This is one of your swing games. This is the difference between actual optimism and feeling good versus the, oh, here we go again, coming out of week two. It's a road game against a team that is also breaking in a new quarterback, that also feels very good about its defense. Probably got a first-round pick at defensive tackle with Deion Walker. Against a team that you always play close with. Like, you got a shot.
Yeah, so to me, this, like you said, very much feels like the North Carolina game from last year, the Arkansas game from the year before, which notably you lost both of, and kind of killed that early season momentum before it could even really get going. You have to win this one to, I think you have to win this one to make it make a bowl. uh, it's maybe a little too early to say that, but as we work through the schedule,
I don't
you'll
disagree
understand
with
why I
that.
say that. I mean, it gets pretty tough pretty quick a few weeks after this. So um, I think you need that. And then also to exceed expectations, to start to become part of the national narrative, to keep the hype train rolling, to sell something to recruits, like all the things. I think you need this win. I think it's a pretty big game. Like you mentioned, as far as what we're looking for from Kentucky, it's going to look pretty similar to the way it has throughout the Stoops era. Um, but this might be one of his better defenses he's had since he's been there. All juniors and seniors on the starting, you know, roster for the defensive depth chart, and the majority of them are seniors. And then, like you said, one of those juniors is probably going to the NFL after his junior season, in the defensive lineman Deion Walker. So it's I think it's points are going to be at a premium, especially if South Carolina's defense is as good as I think that they're going to be as well. Um, yeah, as far as other names that South Carolina fans will recognize, running back, they're returning Demi Sumo Karangbe, who had a pretty solid junior season last year. Brock Vandergrift's probably going to be the quarterback. If you recognize that name, that's because he was at Georgia, right?
Yep,
Georgia.
backing up Carson Beck.
Um, Dane Key was a wide receiver, and Baron Brown was a wide receiver that both kind of broke out last year in a room that was pretty clear for them to. Neither felt like immediate NFL level talent, like maybe some of the guys that they were replacing, but solid and experienced now. And then their offensive line is very old as well, all juniors and seniors along the offensive line. There is one transfer, Gerald Mincy. I don't know where he came from. I'll have to look that up later.
Tennessee?
That sounds right. That's who's
Yeah, he came
slotted
from
at right
Tennessee.
tackle right now, but we'll see how that plays out. So, like I said, very similar to all these other Stoops teams that we've seen. They're going to be experienced along the defensive and offensive front. They're going to run the ball. They have a solid game manager at quarterback. And I expect, to be one of those sluggish, low scoring
Race
South
20
Carolina
points
Kentucky
kind of
games.
games.
Yeah, exactly.
That's kind of how I feel about it too. It's, I think it's one of those games, and obviously we'll get into it more as camp progresses and we kind of learn more, but you don't really know what you have at quarterback for either team. We've had the Sellers conversation a lot, and Brock Vandegrift's a former 5-star, but he barely played at Georgia. You don't really know what you have there if you're Kentucky either, and you add that into breaking the new offensive coordinator at Kentucky as well. After Liam Cohen's 78th bounce back and forth to the NFL in the last 2 years, it feels like. I have no idea. I think this is definitely kind of the learn something game for both teams, like you said, but for our purposes here, talking about South Carolina, just the kind of keep this thing from going off the rails early. I think you gotta go up there and find a way to win a winnable game, even though it certainly will not be an easy game.
An early matchup in this one that we're probably gonna talk a lot about heading into it, and hopefully not talk a lot about heading out of it if you're a South Carolina fan. Uh, Kentucky just came off of a 8-sack performance against Clemson in the bowl game,
Yeah.
and they returned pretty much that entire front seven. So, pretty solid early test for South Carolina's offensive line, which was much maligned last
Yep.
year. We think is going to be better this year, but still young, still inexperienced, and not what you like to see your young, inexperienced offensive line up against in the second game of the season.
Welcome to the SEC. And I think that's probably where the having Tree, having Tro, having those guys play a full season or close to a full season last year, at least, you should start to see some benefits of that. I mean, they're definitely not going to be intimidated by that. They faced that defensive line last year in Columbia. And that's kind of where you need to start seeing it.
Yeah, I agree. So we'll break down all of these games a lot more, obviously, as we get closer to the season. I also do a weekly starting this week, game by game breakdown written on gamecockscoop.com. So you can go read those articles. Also, right now, the weekly recruiting wrap up is on the French page of gamecockscoop.com. If you're interested in what's going on with in state recruits in the 2025 class, I break that down pretty extensively. The only other thing that I talked about, which we can talk about on the podcast, is the offensive lineman we talked about last week that South Carolina had visit from the portal from UTEP. Hubbard, that was his name. Seems like he is not going to ultimately land at South Carolina. He might stick with his Vanderbilt transfer commitment. I don't really know exactly, but not going to end up at South Carolina. So it still wouldn't surprise me if they have some other late portal visits from offensive linemen, just to get that one more depth piece that we've been talking about. But also, they're at the 85 scholarship limit, so we'll see how it plays out. I don't think that they're going to be adding anyone that's
84.
expected
Drew
to start.
Tuazama's transferred out since we last recorded.
Oh, I missed that. Okay, well there you go. So you have room for one more, and my guess is they're still going to try to target another depth piece at offensive line. So
Yep.
that's all there. Anything else you had to say about Old Dominion or Kentucky?
I think that about covers it. And really, just in news in general, we got basketball opponents for the SEC. Still no dates,
Right.
but we at least know who's going where this season. I actually think if you're a basketball fan in Columbia, I'll keep this quick because I know it's May, but if you're a basketball fan in Columbia, this is kind of exciting. If you want to buy some tickets, like if you're on the men's side, you're going to get Alabama coming to CLA next year off of Final Four. John Calipari in Arkansas coming to CLA next year. Bruce Pearl and Auburn coming to CLA. Texas is coming in their first year in the SEC. It's a pretty fun home schedule. Your three opponents you got to play twice are Georgia, Florida, Mississippi State, which I don't think is a terrible draw. And then on the women's side, you get some fun home games too. LSU's coming here with Kim Mulkey. Texas, you play twice, home and away. It's a top 10 matchup probably. You get a road trip to Tennessee with their new coach. Kentucky comes here with their new coach. I think you got some fun home games at least for those who want to think about basketball in May.
Yeah, a lot of fun home games, and like you said, I think kind of a manageable road schedule, at least for the men, which I'm looking at right now. You go to Kentucky, but new head coach. Go to Tennessee, but no Dalton Connect. Go to Oklahoma, which that'll be their first time since 1992 with a road trip in Oklahoma. So,
Yep.
yeah, no, I think about as good as, I mean, it's the SEC, right? It's going to be tough. It's going to be a difficult conference slate, no matter which way you slice it. But certainly not the amount of dread that one felt when you saw the 2024 football
Sure.
schedule release.
And we won't know what the lineup is. You might, I don't know, maybe the SEC is feeling particularly mean to you and you get, I don't know, Tennessee, Kentucky on the road back to back, and then Alabama at home. Like you get this like one of these gauntlet stretches. But for now, all you have is opponents. I think you feel okay about that.
Right. Because, yeah, I mean, even if you look at the 2024 football schedule on the surface, the road games at Oklahoma and at Alabama without context are like, well, you could probably talk yourself into it, I guess, but having them back to back certainly makes it a little worse. So
we'll get to that episode and
yeah,
that'll be what it is.
All right. Well, we will have full coverage on GamecockScoop.com of the Tennessee baseball series this weekend. We're about to hit a window here in a few weeks where there won't be any more live sports that we're covering. So definitely, even if you're not feeling overly optimistic, where you'll be just like us. But if you're not feeling overly optimistic, at least there's still live sports going on right now. So check that out, and we'll be back here next week to hopefully just like put our foot directly in our mouth and see where things stand from there. But this has been the GamecockScoop.com podcast. We'll see you.